When I think about DEI, I think it's finding the ability to recognize that we are different, but it's okay. We can treat people well without discriminating against them, but also give folks opportunities where they might not have had them before.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to this episode of the Multifamily Mind. I'm Steve Wunch, your host, and I'm thrilled today to have with us Marci French. Marci is a dynamic and influential thought leader who utilizes her unique story to facilitate the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as corporate leadership. She facilitates tough conversations and creates brave spaces for participants to explore identities, practice empathy, and consider new ideas. As a certified life and leadership coach, Marci applies more than 25 years of leadership experience to coach and mentor professionals looking to grow in the right direction. She's an international speaker and facilitator sharing messages of encouragement and hope. Her career began in the multifamily industry where she entered multiple designations and accolades. She is a member of the National Apartment Association Board of Directors and senior faculty and has volunteered countless hours on committees throughout the country. Marci holds a certificate in diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace from the University of South Florida and is a National Apartment Association Leadership Lyceum graduate. She enjoys spending quality time with friends and family, and when she's not at home in South Florida, she continues to explore the globe as a lifelong learner of people and cultures. So welcome to the show, Marci. So glad to have you.
Thanks, Steve. I'm so excited to be here with you.
I have so enjoyed this podcast because I get to spend time with people that I don't usually. We might run into each other at a conference, but it's usually just a drive-by.
Like, Steve, hi.
Yeah, woo. But I'm so glad to spend some time with you. And I'm really excited because, you bring a lot to the table in terms of your perspective on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I'm excited to kind of hear what's on your mind. And, let's get the conversation started.
All right. Wow. I think, the DEI space and DEIB, DEIBA, there's, we've kind of evolved.
Changes like every month. There's a new.
Yeah, we're adding things. And, that's something that I'm cautious of because I think it's important. The work is important and the extra letters and what we're focusing on is important. But I also want to make sure we don't forget to take care of the pieces as we go and we evolve. I think diversity is starting to be seen everywhere. I often talk about how when I first started in the industry and I would go to national conferences or some spaces, board meetings, what have you, and not be able to see a lot of folks who look like me. And now I can't keep track of all the different representations there are inside of NAA. So I'm encouraged by that. I think inclusion is getting better. I think equity has still got some work we can do. And then we just, work on the other things, belonging and so forth. But I think the evolution has been strong. And I think there's a lot of great practitioners out there right now. And I feel fortunate to still be able to navigate the space.
Yeah. Well, I love your voice. I love your perspective. I love the energy that you have behind your passion around this topic. And I'm excited too, because, there's so many new voices that are speaking the message of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I think is really cool. We'll see some of those voices, throughout the year at different conferences that we may go to. And so I encourage the folks that are listening, DE&I is a ever evolving and always changing thing. Because we as humans, we're always evolving and always changing. And, there's been some tough times across the country the last few years, especially. It seems that it's really gotten heightened. Sometimes I feel sad that it's been so politicized, but, it is what it is. But do you think that multifamily has been I think we've kind of been maybe not ahead of the 8 ball, but maybe not completely behind the 8 ball in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, just because, fair housing is such a big part of what we do. So we're already mindful, to treat everyone the same and to do the same, offer the same things to everyone who comes to our doors. What's your perspective or perception on how we've, done in this kind of race to the finish with DE&I in mind?
So it's interesting that you say that in comparison to fair housing, because it's actually the take I started with when I became a speaker in that space was that, we learned fair housing at the beginning of our careers, and it's drilled into us that we treat everybody the same. Treat everybody the same so we don't get sued. There's no discrimination. But the truth of the matter, Steve, is we aren't all the same. We're just not. And so how do we navigate our multifamily world when that's the case and we give people what they need, whether it be our prospects, our residents, or our team members, when they're not the same, but we've been taught right from day one, like you can't even talk to somebody until we learn to treat everybody exactly the same. So when I think about DEI, I think it's finding the ability to recognize that we are different, but it's okay.
Yep.
And how do we live in that space? We reconcile that everybody's different. It's okay to recognize that, but make sure we don't violate fair housing. And it becomes a little bit of a contradiction. But I think people, want to be seen to the point of belonging. They want to feel like they can be who they are in their uniqueness and still come to work and be treated well, to be treated equitable, right? So we talk about what's equal versus what is equitable. And I know the years I've spent on the DEI committee for NAA, we started off as the D&I committee, diversity and inclusion. And we added the E, I think maybe the third year. And we had a conversation. Is the E equality or is it equitable? And the conversation became, if I'm 5'3", my daughter is 5'8", she's got a 5-inch advantage on me on height, right? So if you give us both the exact same step stool, we're still going to be 5 inches different in height. But if you give me a step stool that has 5 more inches than hers, now we're at the same place. We can see the same thing. That's what equity is. So we landed on E as for equity. So, I think to your point about the making a political issue, I couldn't say the word I wanted to say, makes me sad because it doesn't need to be a divisive conversation. I think people just want to be who they are, whether it's different who other people are, and still be okay to come to work and give their best and perform their best and have an acceptance that allows that. So, I think as time goes on, we start to have a better understanding of where DEI and fair housing is a little different and how we can still treat everybody without discriminating against them. EEOC as well, right? We can treat people well without discriminating against them, but also give folks opportunities where they might not have had them before.
Hi, folks. I wanted to take a quick 30-second break so that I could say, I hope you're enjoying today's episode, which couldn't be brought to you without being superpowered by Sales Mail. I mean, really, we couldn't produce this content without them. Sales Mail is the easiest and best tool for sending personalized video via email, text, and CRM. So, if you really are enjoying today's episode, it would mean a lot to me if you would visit salesmail.com so you can check out how our solutions might impact your business communications. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn as well. Okay, that's enough. Now back to the conversation. Well, I used to think when I was teaching leasing, all the time when I would get to those conversations that we would have about connecting with somebody, home is such an emotionally packaged decision for someone to make. And for someone's moving from another country and there's, an element of that country, whether it be, someone in the community who is from that area, or, maybe there's a restaurant or a shop that I know about that's in that area. We've been so conditioned to step away from that conversation versus saying, oh gosh, I know a couple of folks who have the same, who are looking for the same thing as you. I'd be happy to make some introductions for you. And I think it's just such a landmine when it comes to fair housing. But I always used to think, as long as you don't take what you know about someone and let that influence your decision on whether or not you're going to present them with a housing option, you don't really violate fair housing. what you're doing is you're creating that sense of community that everybody wants to be a part of. And I'm hopeful that as an industry, we'll be able to see and really see that difference clearly so that folks can begin, because I think, and you may agree or disagree with me, but I think even, Gen Z and Gen Y, they're looking for those connections. They're looking for that sense of community. And I just think sometimes it's, one of those adages where our policies get in the way of helping us to create that real feel of home for folks. What are your thoughts in that regard?
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I can think of two examples. I was on site recently, and I've recently moved over to the asset management side, but I've been working at a particular community on some CapEx projects and was helping the management company interview some leasing folks and help them identify somebody, and was there with her the first week. And I got to get back into my leasing training, and we spent some time talking about that. And I said, you're going to get fair housing training, but let's talk a little bit about that. And, I talked to her about the perception of discrimination. It doesn't have to be that you discriminated, but what did you say or do that is perceived as discrimination? And to your point, the idea that you would be able to connect with people is what draws people to your communities and to your teams to work there, right?
For sure, yeah.
Part of her wanting to work at the community was we found a place where we could connect. She's the leasing consultant coming in. I work in ownership, and I was able to share with her my story of how I started in leasing at a community very similar to the one I was interviewing her for, and how I was able to work my way through my career. And that was a connection that we had. And maybe I didn't have that connection with every person I interviewed, but it was an opportunity for her and for me. I also think about my daughter. So this is my drinking game right now. Every time I say my daughter started in the industry recently, everybody should take a drink. But she's Gen Z, and she works for somebody I know in the industry, and there was a connection there. And I was concerned about whether my daughter would be a good fit for the community that she was interviewing for, because my daughter is very firm in who she is. She's very firm in how she identifies, how she shows up, the things she's not willing to give up or compromise. And
good for her.
It is good for her. And she has a strength and an independence that I did not have at her age. But I also know our industry. And when you are going to go to an A property in a downtown location, you gotta, fit the part. Yeah. And so we had a long conversation about how she shows up to work. And she was working at a B style community, and it was a little bit more relaxed of a dress code or how things navigate. And she said, Mom, I can do what I need to do, and I'm going to show up. I'm going to make you proud. I promise I won't embarrass you. And she has killed it. The first, I think, month she was on the job, she was able to lease an apartment that had been sitting vacant for a year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She was so proud. And she's been able to do it while bringing her authenticity of who she is to the space. And to your point, Gen Z is really not interested in compromising who they are for their employer. So we're either going to lighten up a little bit, or maybe the things we've been focusing on aren't really that big of a big deal to begin with. So
yeah, I would agree. I think we scare people into compliance, which is that's part of the process. That's what we have to do. Yeah. But I think once we get them to the point where they're scared, that we need to relax a little bit. And I don't want to contradict anything that anyone in the listening audience has been taught, or any policies or guidelines that their company would be enforcing. But this is just a conversation for us to have around how this, dynamic in the multifamily and in the general world is, it's always changing. It's something you need to make sure that you're always on top of. But I have been my authentic self probably to a fault, and I don't plan on changing, but it's not everybody's that comfortable in their own skin. Yeah. So, those guidelines are in place to kind of help get you through. At the start of your career, I think it's a good way to start, but I think we do have some room for growth and change and a different iteration.
You can use your voice. I always say, I tell her and I tell folks when they come into the space new, I say, connection, to your point, is so important, right? The connection that you make with the people, the humans. And as we, go through this evolution of AI and technology and all of that that's showing up in our industry, the human connection is going to be the thing you absolutely cannot replace. And so being able to connect is going to always make you a rock star if you're a team member, at a community, and if you're a leader and have people reporting to you. But, I think the combination, you're absolutely correct. It's still a business. You still have to be professional. Every time I do any kind of facilitation on these conversations, I say, I am not a fair housing instructor. Yeah. I'm an EEOC person. And don't go back to your company and say, Marci said you should let me ABC, because read your employee handbook. I'm a rule follower and I believe in rules. So follow them and don't get in trouble. But use your voice. New people coming into our space, they're going to think about things we didn't think about because we've been looking at the same employee handbook for 15 years, 10 years, 20, whatever the amount of time is. We stopped seeing the things that just don't make sense anymore.
Right. Well, and I think too, we had this conversation in our pre-episode discussions that it's not just about race. It's not only one thing. It's many things. I mean, it's your sexuality, it's your orientation, it's your home of origin, it's your color, it's your religion. I mean, there's so many different layers to the concept of DE&I, and it's really an opportunity to create just a rich experience for somebody if you're able to, look beyond compliance and find that connection with people on a human level. I think that's the key.
Absolutely. I mean, diversity of thought comes from experiences, and our experiences are made up of so many things: how we grew up, where we grew up, who we grew up around, the types of things we were exposed to as kids, whether we grew up with two parents or one parent or with grandparents. Or I just think that the ability to tap into all of our different experiences create such an opportunity, not only for connection, but success inside of our industries, inside of our communities. So I like to spend time talking about diversity in different ways. Obviously, I show up in the world as a woman who's Black, biracial, and that's the viewpoint I take. But, there's so many other things about me that makes me think the way I do. I live in a bigger metropolitan area now, but I grew up in a small town and my graduating class was 44 people. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. My kids both graduated with over 700 people. So just that experience alone has us navigating the world differently. So.
And, it's funny because I'm 55 this year. I'll be 56 in July of 2024. And, thinking back on my childhood, like the jokes my dad would tell and some of the things that they would talk about are just so wrong.
Yeah.
As where the world is now. Yes. And I look back and I think, how in the world did that happen? And, it wasn't their intention by any measure to be, discriminatory in their commentary. They just didn't have that filter to look at the world through like we do today. And, I've always been one who's appreciated people's differences. I'm a gay man, and I grew up in a very conservative home, and I wasn't able to be myself for a long time. And I think that in part has probably really helped to shape my ability to be my authentic self. And I don't care really what other people think. Well, I do, but I don't.
You work through those things. So it gives you an appreciation for authenticity in a different way.
Yeah. Well, and then I also think of people like my friend Alicia Anderson, who is on the speaking circuit. And I know that you had the privilege of seeing her speak at NAA a couple of years ago in San Diego. And, she's been wheelchair bound since birth. And she doesn't look at that as a disability for anything. I mean, it is really her identity, and it's what makes her a powerful woman. And, so oftentimes in multifamily, we think we've got fair housing covered. We checked the box. We took our training. We've got, if we were built after March of 1991, we've got a certain percentage of apartments that are ADA compliant. So we've checked that box. But, to her, it's so much more than just wide doorways and stove knobs that I can reach. I can't use the amenities like everyone else can. I can't use the pool like everyone else can. And it's more than just those things that keep us compliant.
Yep.
And so, I love to see the conversation around DEI moving towards, I use the phrase committed versus compliant.
Yes.
Because when we commit to it, when we really put our skin in the game, no pun intended, when we get in the game and we really are interested in people for who they are at a human level, I think it changes everything.
Absolutely. And, I always say, can we just do it because it's the right thing to do, not because it's the compliant thing
because we have to.
Can we care about humans? So yes, I love Alicia, and we've had some really great conversations, and I've utilized her just to help me in a landscape that isn't my experience, right? So she's been somebody I call and I ask about language and how things should be presented. And she's been so gracious to be a support for me as well as a facilitator. And we've had some there's a sisterhood between the two of us for sure. But I remember last year, a couple of years ago, I had surgery on my foot and I had to stay off of it for a certain amount of time. And I can recall going to Costco, and I had to use one of those little motor scooter things with the basket on it because I wasn't supposed to be on my foot and I needed to go grocery shopping. And the struggle to get around the store. And I remember thinking of her, and I sent her a message and I said, this was such an eye opener for me, because to your point, those places are compliant. But here I am in the vegetable section just trying to get a salad. And I remember getting so frustrated because no one would let me through. So I jumped up and hopped on my good foot over, grabbed it, and sat back down. And as soon as I sat down, it dawned on me, how many people that wasn't an option for?
Right.
Like literally have to sit frustrated until somebody's kind enough to move so you could get through. It's empathy, right?
Yeah.
It's the ability to empathize for other people's experiences, for what they go through, not what you think they go through, to actually listen, to hear and understand, I think is empowering. It's
wow.
powerful.
It is powerful. Like empathy is such an underused skill, not just in multifamily, I think in the world in general. But there's such power behind it. And then, just looking at things through a different lens, and, it's the human experience is so diverse. I think that what you used a word, I think DE&I should be like diversity, inclusion, and empathy.
Yeah. We can add an extra E for sure.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's amazing to think about how much opportunity still exists in the world for everyone to have the same type of access, for everyone to have, the freedom to be their authentic self. And it's such a powerful topic. I mean, we could have way longer conversation than, just an hour together today, just with all the different layers. I remember when I was working at Landmark Apartment Trust a few years ago, this would have probably been 2015. My HR director and I went to a diversity and inclusion workshop at Disney.
Oh, wow.
And it was really amazing to see how, and the conversation, and part of the conversation was the LGBTQIA community. And they had some transgender folks who were part of the Disney workforce. And they were talking about how supportive Disney was as they were making the transition during their work with Disney. And, my HR person said, that's never even been on my mind. I would have never even thought to be ready for that. And I kid you not, Marci, we were back in the office maybe a week, and we had a team member reach out from one of the sites and said, I don't know what to do because I want to transition and I'm not sure what I need to do or how I need to handle that. So, and that was, quite a number of years ago. Not everybody agrees with that. And I don't care what your stance is from a religious perspective or, what you think is right or wrong. It's still, that is an authentic experience for the person who's going through it. And without empathy, there's no way we're ever going to be able to serve that person the way that they deserve to be served.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I've had these conversations often when I'm finished with a session that I'm facilitating. I'll have folks come up and want to have private conversations afterwards because they don't want to ask those questions in front of the whole room because it might be perceived as bigoted. They really have genuine questions and concerns. And I had a gentleman stop me one day and say, it is, to your point, it was against his religious beliefs to I don't know, to recognize, I guess, that someone would be transgender. That was their beliefs. And I said, at the end of the day, whatever your belief system is, most of the ones I know, the religions I know that are organized, talk about treating people either the way you would want to be treated or the way they want to be treated, right? We've got the golden rule and we've got the platinum rule, right? The golden rule is treat people as you would want to be treated. The platinum rule is to treat people the way they want to be.
They want to be treated. Hey. And
I said, what rule or what thing, commandment, whatever, you believe, are you breaking by merely letting that person be who they want to be? You're not doing anything. You're just recognizing them for the name they want to be called and the pronoun they want to use. Where does it say you are doing something bad? Where are you breaking some rule in your religion? And couldn't really point to that. And I said, that's the piece, right? Mm-hmm. Let them work that out for themselves. You work it out for yourselves. But in the meantime, you can just treat each other with kindness and acceptance. And that's
and
all
respect.
Asking. And we're all doing the best we can. I think I'm still learning. And I always start off every session with, I'm a human being and I make mistakes. Please know that somewhere in this next hour, or whatever time I'm going to spend with them, I may say something that you would like me to reconsider or correct. And that's okay because I'm not perfect. One of my daughter's really close friend is non-binary and they use the pronouns they, them. And I have struggled remembering that because if you're my age or older, you probably have been taught, English is, he, she, they, and it's plural for the most part. And we're relearning our language. And I say, I'm closer to 50 than I am to 40. And that's a lot of years to be using language a certain way. Mm-hmm. And please forgive me every time I slip. I ask that person for their forgiveness. They're always very kind to be gracious that I'm doing the best I can and that I recognize it and I'm trying to use the right language. And I think that goes a long way.
Sure it does.
Just doing the best we can or asking questions with the right intention behind it. Mm-hmm. I sat down with them when they first came to my house. I wanted to learn about them. I constantly want to be learning. And I said, talk to me about your experience. Talk to me about how you've been able to teach people to gender you correctly. How frustrating is it to have to continually do that everywhere you go? Because people are assuming based on what they see, your gender. I said, talk to me about that. And just almost did it again. They taught me a significant amount. And I was so, my heart broke actually, just thinking about navigating a space where you have to constantly remind people who you are, how you identify. I don't understand that very specific experience. So now I only know what they've told me.
Right. Well, the good thing is that you've approached it from a place of curiosity, not judgment. Yeah. Which is a Ted Lassoism, I think, for sure. But, that's the key there is, I'm curious about the world that I live in. And the more curious I get, the more things I'll learn about, the more understanding I'll have. And the more I'll be able to connect with people that I wouldn't otherwise be able to connect with. Because once you close that door on curiosity, you kind of pigeonhole yourself to stay where you're at and not to move forward and not to become a better you,
For sure.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And, it's such a different world. I think back when I was a kid and, how I had to keep everything hidden, although everyone knew, we always think they don't know, but they have a clue. They just don't want to talk about it because they don't understand it. And I really think that that is kind of the bottom line when it comes to all of these, conversations around DE&I and all the other letters that come along with it. It's just, we sometimes fear what we don't know.
Yes.
And what we don't understand. And that's why I think there's so much angst in the world, is just because something is different. It's not what we're used to, and we don't know how to deal with it. And, my age group was not taught about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right.
We lived it out because, I grew up in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and in the Denver area. And I mean, there were maybe 3 Black kids in my 700 graduating class.
Yeah.
But I also had a kid in my class in 1986, Marci, who was transgender and transitioned during school.
Wow.
And I oftentimes wonder what became I've tried to connect, and I've tried to find that person just to see, where they're at today. But I thought, gosh, how brave back then, when it was not something that people were even remotely aware of, to be that brave and to be that authentic to yourself that you just didn't care. And it comes down to only worry about what you can control, right? And the only thing we can control,
because there wasn't a lot of representation for that to mimic. No. Like I grew up in Colorado as well. And I'm a little bit younger than you, but same generation. And I think about all the time, both of my children identify in the LGBTQIA plus community, and they always are fine with me telling folks that. But I think when I look at how they grew up, my daughter will tell you, she didn't come out. There was no need to have a sit down, come out conversation. That's who she was, and she navigated her life, and that's it. But I think about how many of my friends in our age group that I grew up with, that I never considered, I didn't have the language for the LGBTQ community at that time. And that I had no idea, we weren't talking about it. Right. But now that we're all adults, and there's several of the people I grew up with who now are out and identify in that community, and I look back and go, I guess maybe they were trying to tell us without, we didn't have the language. So everybody was doing the best they could. So we had different labels that made people feel uncomfortable. Right. And now, I'm so grateful that these next generations are able to identify and use the language that they're comfortable with without having to skirt around it and try to figure it out, because they have representation. Yeah.
And, I still feel it every once in a while. My sister, who's 13 years older than I am, if there's a gay couple in a TV show or a commercial, she'll roll her eyes and make some comment. And I'm just like, I'm sitting right here.
I can hear you.
Yeah, I do have 2 ears, and I can hear you on both sides. But, and even with my parents, I couldn't expect them to change. They were in their 80s when they passed. There's no way they're going to change overnight to be accepting. And they did the best that they could. Yep. And I appreciated that. But to your point, I think that the generations of now are so much more advanced in terms of their perspective on the world. What matters to them is so different than what mattered to us when we were their age. Like, we weren't worried about social and environmental and social, equity and giving back to community and, all the things that are so important to their decisions around, where they call home. It's neat. It's really neat to see the progression. It's sad to see that we haven't progressed further in some respects, but appreciate folks like you who are continuing to, propagate that conversation and make people aware. What else? Have you heard anything else in terms of within the multifamily space that relates to DE&I, or have we had a pretty solid conversation on what you've kind of got on your radar right now?
I think what you're talking about is the fluidity of the next generation. So I am seeing that, right? We see that folks are more fluid in how they appear and how they love and how they identify. And I'm seeing that hit the multifamily space. And I think to your point about the generations, we've got 5 generations in the workplace right now. And that's the first time in history that it's been that many generations. And to your point, we talk about acceptance of those who are coming in authentic and unique, and how they identify, and fluid, and how we're going to be mindful of those thoughts and ideas. But to your point, we also have to be mindful and gracious to the thoughts of and ideas of people who are from the generations that are older. Because I have this conversation with my daughter all the time that, you got to be careful. Just because you think this way, somebody who is in their 70s or 80s, they've been thinking that way their whole life. Yep. Their whole life. And you come in and you have a different way of thinking and presenting, and that's new. You can't just expect folks to change their mind. So I think the conversation about generational diversity is definitely come to the forefront. And that shows up in all different ways. How we work, our work ethic, and what we consider a strong work ethic. I don't know about you, but I was coming to work 30 minutes early and staying an hour late and not clocking in for that time. So I didn't make anybody mad, just so I could get ahead and try to prove that, I can work really hard. I was a single mom and I was working till midnight some nights at the my children not having their mom present all the time. Right. Gen Z, and they're not really interested in working 80 hours a week. They're interested in spending some time with their families and with their friends, and in the things that give them purpose, that support their purpose. And that perception of hard work is different depending on what generation you're in. So I see that conversation a lot in the different generations we have.
Yeah, that's interesting to see how that. And it doesn't mean that they have less of a work ethic than you or I did. It just means that they have their priorities in a different place than you and I did. They
have boundaries. That's the favorite word right now, is boundaries. And I appreciate it. I think they teach me. So I learned so much.
There's a lot we can learn for sure, as long as we are curious about one another. Again, it comes back to that conversation on curiosity. I know the old adage was curiosity killed the cat, but my new adage is, curiosity is way better than judgment any day. And that's the only way that we're going to learn about one another is through those curious conversations that we get to have, that we're lucky to have, right?
Yes, it's appreciation. I think having an appreciation of people who are different from you, full stop. Whatever that different from you looks like or sounds like, or however it shows up, having an appreciation for people that are different, I just think is the winning formula, period. Yep. So
I'm going to kind of preamble my final question for you. I have a couple. I could talk to you all day because I love this topic and you're so well informed and such a good speaker. Do you think that multifamily will make some changes sooner rather than later in terms of how we look at equality, equity, inclusion, whether it's from a leasing perspective, fair housing perspective? Do you think that's on the horizon, or do you think it's going to be a while still?
I think it's going to get harder before it gets easier, if I'm honest. I think that we've got two things going on in our industry. We have a lot of laws that are getting updated and changed. I think, depending on where you're from, I live in Florida, and the narrative surrounding DEI has been very negative. So there's a lot of negative discussions about it, and not a lot of support as a whole. And I'm very generalizing with a big broad brush, so keep that in mind. I do a lot of work in the state of Florida. People are still interested in the conversation, but as an overarching theme, it's being removed in a lot of spaces. So you've got that side of it, but then to all this conversation we've had about the younger generations coming in to the workspace, they are very adamant about showing up authentic. And maybe the language changes, right? Maybe it's called something else other than DEI, but the two, I think, are going to come to a head. I think we have people who pay money in our communities, and we want to do everything in our power to make sure that whether it's an investor, it's who's managing, it's who's working there, it's who's living there, that we don't do anything to preclude them from wanting to come into the community, which means maybe we don't talk about the things that become divisive because we don't want to preclude anybody or make anybody uncomfortable. But at the same time, we've got people who say, well, then when you ignore these differences,
right,
I don't feel welcome or comfortable here. So the two are going to be, I think, come to a head. I think we're going to have to find the sweet spot and balance it. So,
well, and I think as we evolve as human beings, it's going to continue to be. It's like chasing the end of a rainbow. You're never going to get to it. You can see it. It's out there, but the closer you get, the further it seems to move away from you. So I think it's a conversation that will continue to evolve and will continue to change and embrace and do everything that we can to create that inclusive, welcoming community, not only from a residential perspective, but from an employment perspective as well. I'd like to continue the conversation with you, Marci, too. I'd like us to dive into the EEOC side of the coin, because we had some interesting interactions in that session with Alicia, if you recall, about how do I present myself as an employer who's ready and able and willing to be a great partner to anyone, regardless of their ability or their challenges. So maybe we can have you back on another episode. Would you be up for that?
I would love that. And I've had some experience, not as much as Alicia, but I think at one point I ran a management company and had to work with team members and, accommodation modification requests. And I think it's a great conversation to have, because there's opportunity to bring people in that will be amazing if you get out of your own way with bias, right?
Yep. Okay, cool. Well, I have one final question for you. We ask this of all of our guests. You may have already gone there. I'm not sure, because some of the stuff that we've talked about today has been pretty audacious from some folks' perspective. But, I always ask, what's your most audacious take on multifamily right now? And the way we define audacious, Marci, is it's extremely bold, daring, recklessly brave, fearless, kind of like that explorer who's going to, no matter what people tell them how dangerous something is, they're going to still go out and climb that mountain or spelunk that cave because they've got that, reckless abandon and desire to see things. So that's kind of our take on audaciousness. What's your most audacious take on multifamily right now? It doesn't necessarily have to be in the context of what we've talked about today, but I think it probably will be.
Yeah, I think, it is, because I think about the prior conversation about employee handbooks and the things that we have these strict rules around. And again, don't go back and say Marci said. But I think that we have just been focusing on the wrong things. I don't really care what color your hair is. I don't think I really care that you have a nose piercing or
a tattoo. Yeah.
And I don't know about you, Steve, but we used to have to wear, us young ladies had to wear pantyhose every day if we wore a skirt. And in a million years, we probably never would have thought that would no longer be a rule, right? So I think the more we're going to let people show up comfortable, there's a space between my purple hair. I don't have purple hair, but I've had team members who did. Purple hair and professional, the whole definition of professional is, I think, going to get turned on its head. And maybe not today. Maybe we're all holding on tightly to what we think professional is. But holding
on to that employee handbook that was written in 1992. Right.
I think a few years from now, I think we're going to start seeing it loosen up.
Good. Love it. That's a great take. So appreciate your time. I know you're a busy lady, so I really thank you for, making this a priority for you as well as for us. I've enjoyed the conversations, and I know our audience will really get a lot out of this. Thank you, Marci, for joining me. And I look forward to our next take as well, because I think there's a lot more to be discussed in this space. So appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me and giving a voice to this topic. Whenever somebody creates allyship by by leaving room for these type of conversations and voices like mine, I'm forever grateful. So thank you.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, this has been Steve Wunch and Marci French on the Multifamily Mind, super powered by Sales Mail. Thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Cheers. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Multifamily Mind podcast, brought to you by Sales Mail, the easiest way to send personalized video via email, text, and CRM. To learn more, go to salesmail.com. And remember, always be audacious. Until next time, I'm Steve Wunch. Have a great week.